David stared at the empty boxes scattered across his new apartment floor. 3 months had passed since his divorce, and he was finally ready to start fresh. The apartment complex wasn't fancy, but it had character. Red brick walls, vintage elevators, and a small courtyard in the center where residents could sit and enjoy the evening breeze. He had chosen the 3rd floor specifically because of the view. From his kitchen window, he could see the courtyard and the apartments across from him. It felt less lonely that way, knowing other people were living their lives just a few meters away. The first week went by quietly. David focused on unpacking his things and getting used to his new routine. He worked from home as a graphic designer, so he spent most of his time at his computer near the window. During coffee breaks, he would look out at the courtyard and watch people come and go. That's when he first noticed her. She lived in the apartment directly across from his. David could see her kitchen window clearly from his own. She had long, dark hair that she often wore loose around her shoulders, and even from a distance, he could tell she had the kind of presence that drew attention without trying. He learned her schedule without meaning to. She would leave every evening around 7, dressed in scrubs, carrying a small bag. A nurse, he figured. She worked nights, which meant she came home in the early morning when most people were just waking up. David found himself timing his morning coffee to coincide with her return. He would pretend to be busy at his computer, but really he was watching for her small red car to pull into the parking lot. She always looked tired when she came home, but there was something graceful about the way she moved, even when she was exhausted. The first time they actually met was in the mailbox area downstairs. David was checking his mail when she walked in, still in her scrubs from the night shift, up close. She was even more striking than he had imagined. Her eyes were a deep brown, and when she smiled at him, it was warm and genuine. "You must be the new neighbor," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm Elena. I live in 3C. "David," he replied, suddenly feeling nervous. "3A. Nice to meet you." They chatted for a few minutes about the building, the neighborhood, and how he was settling in. Elena was easy to talk to, and David found himself wishing the conversation would last longer. But she mentioned being tired after her shift, and they parted ways. That night, David couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. Elena had been so friendly, so natural. He wondered what it would be like to know her better, to maybe ask her for coffee sometime. But he wasn't sure if that was appropriate. He was still getting over his divorce, and Elena was probably just being neighborly. Over the next few weeks, they ran into each other occasionally. A brief hello in the hallway, a wave across the courtyard, small talk while waiting for the elevator. Each interaction was pleasant but short. David began to look forward to these moments more than he cared to admit. He started noticing details about Elena that he hadn't seen before. The way she hummed softly to herself when she thought no one was listening. How she always stopped to pet the building's stray cat that hung around the entrance. The fact that she kept plants on her windowsill and watered them carefully every few days. David's imagination began to fill in the gaps. He wondered what Elena's apartment looked like, what kind of music she listened to, what she did on her days off. These thoughts were innocent at first, just curiosity about an attractive neighbor who seemed kind and interesting. But gradually, his thoughts about Elena became more frequent and more detailed. He would find himself daydreaming about cooking dinner for her, about having long conversations over coffee, about what it would be like to hold her hand or dance with her in her living room. The dreams started around the same time. Vivid dreams where Elena was there with him, where they talked and laughed and shared quiet moments together. In these dreams, she seemed to understand him perfectly, as if she could read his thoughts and emotions without him having to explain anything. David would wake up from these dreams feeling confused and slightly guilty. Elena was a real person, not a character in his imagination. But the dreams felt so real, so natural, that he couldn't shake the memory of them during the day. One morning, while getting his mail, David ran into Elena again. She looked at him with a strange expression, almost like she was trying to remember something. "I had the strangest dream last night," she said, laughing softly. I dreamed someone was cooking pasta for me. It was so vivid I could actually smell the garlic and herbs. David's heart skipped a beat. The night before, he had fallen asleep thinking about making Elena his grandmother's famous pasta recipe, imagining how happy she would be to come home to a home-cooked meal after a long shift. "That sounds like a nice dream," he managed to say, trying to keep his voice casual. "It was." Elena replied, still smiling. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal in months. I usually just grab something quick before work." The conversation moved on to other topics, but David couldn't stop thinking about what Elena had said. It was probably just a coincidence, but something about it felt significant. The detail about the garlic and herbs was exactly what he had been imagining. Over the following days, David paid closer attention to his interactions with Elena. He noticed small things that seemed to connect to his thoughts from the night before, when he had imagined taking her to the new coffee shop down the street. She mentioned wanting to try their cappuccino. When he had thought about what kind of books she might like, she was carrying a novel from the exact genre he had pictured. David tried to tell himself these were just coincidences. People living in the same neighborhood naturally thought about the same local places and activities. But deep down, he was starting to wonder if something more unusual was happening. The feeling grew stronger each day. Elena seemed to be responding to thoughts he hadn't spoken aloud, to desires he had kept private. It was impossible, of course, but the alternative explanation that everything was just random chance was becoming harder to believe. David found himself both excited and scared by the possibility. If Elena could somehow sense his thoughts, what did that mean for both of them? And more importantly, what was he supposed to do about it? David's daily routine began to revolve around Elena without him fully realizing it. He would wake up early, not because he had to, but because he wanted to catch a glimpse of her coming home from her night shift. He told himself it was just a coincidence that his morning coffee always happened to be ready right when her little red car pulled into the parking lot from his kitchen window. He could see her clearly as she walked across the courtyard. She always looked tired but peaceful, like someone who had just finished helping people through their darkest hours. David admired that about her. His own work designing websites and logos felt less meaningful in comparison. The coincidences started small. One evening, David had been thinking about a book he wanted to read. It was an old mystery novel his father had recommended years ago, but he had never gotten around to buying it. The next morning, while taking out his trash, he found Elena in the hallway holding the exact same book. "Good morning," she said, smiling. "I just finished reading this. It's really good, but I'm not sure what to do with it now. Do you know anyone who might want to borrow it?" David's heart raced. "Actually, I've been meaning to read that one. My dad recommended it to me." "Perfect timing then," Elena said, handing him the book. "I hope you enjoy it as much as I did." As she walked away, David stared at the book in his hands. It could have been a coincidence, but something about the way Elena had offered it felt intentional, like she had known he wanted it. The next incident happened 3 days later. David had been craving good coffee all week. The instant stuff he bought at the grocery store wasn't cutting it, and he kept thinking about this small coffee shop he had seen downtown. He had even looked up their menu online and imagined what their specialty drinks might taste like. That evening, he ran into Elena at the mailboxes again. She was holding a small paper bag that smelled incredible. "I discovered this amazing coffee shop today," she said, practically glowing with excitement. "They have the best cappuccino I've ever tasted. It's called Brew and Bean, downtown on 5th Street. David felt his skin prickle. That was the exact shop he had been thinking about. "I've been wanting to try that place," he said carefully. "You should definitely go. I got some of their beans to take home." Elena held up the bag. "I'm becoming addicted to their house blend." After she left, David sat in his apartment thinking about what had just happened. The coincidences in 1 week seemed like a lot, but then again, they lived in the same neighborhood. It made sense that they would think about the same local places. The pattern continued over the following weeks. David would have a thought or craving, and within a day or two, Elena would mention something related to it when he spent an evening thinking about how much he missed dancing. Elena mentioned signing up for a dance class at the community center. When he craved homemade pizza, she talked about perfecting her pizza dough recipe. David began to test it, though he told himself he was just being paranoid. One night, he spent 20 minutes thinking about a specific song his grandmother used to hum while cooking. It was an old melody, not something people his age would normally know. The next morning, he heard Elena humming that exact tune as she watered her plants on the windowsill. When she saw him watching from his window, she waved and smiled, but continued humming the melody as if it was the most natural thing in the world. David's hand shook as he waved back. There was no logical explanation for this one. The song was too obscure, too specific to his own family memories. Elena couldn't have known it by chance. He started paying closer attention to Elena's behavior. She seemed to know things about him that he had never told anyone. During their brief conversations, she would ask about his work in ways that showed she understood his frustrations with difficult clients, even though he had never mentioned having any problems. One evening, Elena knocked on his door. She was holding a small container of soup. "I made too much chicken soup," she said. "I thought you might want some. You looked a bit tired today." David had been feeling under the weather all week, fighting off a cold. He hadn't told anyone about it, and he was sure it wasn't obvious from looking at him. "That's very thoughtful," he said, accepting the container. "How did you know I wasn't feeling well?" Elena paused, looking slightly confused. "I'm not sure. I just had a feeling you could use some comfort food." As David ate the soup later that night, he realized it tasted exactly like the chicken soup his mother used to make when he was sick as a child. It had the same herbs, the same rich broth, even the same small pasta shapes. He had been thinking about that soup just the night before, missing the comfort of being cared for when he didn't feel well. The incidents became more frequent and more specific. Elena would leave small gifts outside his door: a magazine article about graphic design trends, a packet of his favorite tea, a small plant that looked perfect for his windowsill. Each gift seemed to respond to something he had been thinking about or wishing for. David began to feel like Elena was living inside his head, experiencing his thoughts and responding to his needs. For he even asked for help. It was both thrilling and terrifying. One morning, he decided to be more direct. When he saw Elena in the courtyard, he walked over to her. "Elena," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," she replied, looking at him with those deep brown eyes that always seemed to see more than they should. "Do you ever feel like we're connected somehow? Like you know things about me that I haven't told you?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. She looked around the courtyard, then back at him. "I've been having very vivid dreams lately," she said. Slowly, dreams about someone who feels familiar, but I can't place who it is. In these dreams, I know things about this person's life, their thoughts, their feelings. It's like I'm experiencing their memories." David's heart pounded. "What kind of things do you know in these dreams?" "Small things," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Favorite foods, childhood memories, worries about work. Things that feel too real to be just imagination." They stood in silence for a moment, both understanding that something extraordinary was happening between them, even if they couldn't explain what it was. "I think," David said finally, "we need to talk about this more." Elena nodded. "I think you're right." David couldn't sleep that night. Elena's words kept playing in his mind. She had dreams about someone whose thoughts and feelings she could experience. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. He had to know for sure if what he suspected was really happening. The next evening, David decided to conduct a test. He sat at his kitchen table with a pen and paper, trying to calm his racing heart. If Eleanor really could somehow access his thoughts, then he would give her something specific to dream about. He closed his eyes and focused intensely on a single image: a small garden behind a white house, with red roses climbing up a wooden fence. In his mind, he placed Elena in this garden, wearing a blue summer dress, picking tomatoes from vine plants while humming softly. He imagined the smell of fresh herbs, the sound of bees buzzing around the flowers, and the feeling of warm earth under bare feet. David concentrated on this scene for nearly an hour, adding details and making the image as vivid as possible. He imagined Elena laughing as she found a particularly large tomato, her hair catching the afternoon sunlight. He could almost hear her voice saying how peaceful the garden made her feel. When he finally opened his eyes, David felt exhausted but determined. If Elena had the same dream tonight, he would have his answer. The next morning, David waited nervously by his window. Elena's car pulled into the parking lot right on schedule. But instead of going straight to her apartment, she walked over to the courtyard and looked up at his window. When she saw him, she gestured for him to come down. David's legs felt weak as he walked to the elevator. This was it. Either he was about to confirm something impossible, or he was about to embarrass himself completely. Elena was waiting by the small garden area that the building management had recently added to the courtyard. She looked different somehow, more alert despite having just finished a night shift. "David," she said, her voice slightly shaky, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course," he replied, though his mouth felt dry. "Do you know anything about a garden with red roses and a white house? Maybe from a dream or a memory?" David's heart stopped. "Why do you ask?" Elena took a deep breath. "Because I had the most vivid dream last night. I was in this beautiful garden, wearing a blue dress I've never owned, picking tomatoes and feeling incredibly peaceful. But here's the strange part. It didn't feel like my dream. It felt like I was experiencing someone else's memory or imagination." David stared at her in amazement. "What else do you remember from the dream?" "There were herbs growing nearby, and I could smell them so clearly. Basil, rosemary, maybe some mint. There was a wooden fence with climbing roses, and bees were buzzing around the flowers. I remember thinking how perfect the moment was, how this was exactly the kind of simple happiness I'd been missing. Every detail was exactly as David had imagined it. There was no way Elena could have known these specifics, unless she had somehow accessed his thoughts. "Elena," David said slowly, "I think we need to sit down." They found a bench in the courtyard, and David told Elena about his experiment the night before. He described how he had concentrated on the garden scene, how he had placed her in it, even down to the blue dress and the feeling of peace. Elena listened without interrupting, her eyes growing wider with each detail. When David finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "This is really happening, isn't it?" she said finally. "I'm somehow experiencing your thoughts and dreams." "It seems that way," David replied, "but I don't understand how or why." Elena stood up and began pacing. "I've always been sensitive to other people's emotions, even as a child. I could tell when someone was sad or worried, even if they were trying to hide it. That's part of why I became a nurse. I could sense what patients needed before they asked." "But this is different," David said. "Very different," Elena agreed. "I've never experienced someone else's actual thoughts and memories before, and it's only been happening since you moved in." David felt a mix of excitement and worry. "Are you okay with this? I mean, it must be disturbing to have someone else's thoughts in your head." Elena sat back down beside him. "That's just it. It doesn't feel disturbing. Your thoughts feel warm and kind. In the dreams, I feel cared for and understood. It's like having a friend inside my mind who only wants good things for me." Over the following days, David and Elena began meeting regularly to discuss what was happening. Elena would describe her dreams in detail, and David would confirm whether they matched his thoughts from the night before. The accuracy was nearly perfect every time. "I dreamed about a rainy day," Elena told him one morning. "We were in a cozy living room with a fireplace, drinking hot chocolate and reading books. You were reading something about art history, and I was reading a mystery novel." David nodded. "I spent half the night thinking about how nice it would be to have a quiet, rainy day like that with you. And last night," Elena continued, "I dreamed we were at a small Italian restaurant. You were nervous about something, maybe about asking me a question. The walls were covered with old photographs, and there was a musician playing guitar in the corner. I was thinking about asking you to dinner." David admitted, There's this little Italian place downtown that I thought you might like. Elena smiled. I would love to have dinner with you, but maybe we should talk about what's happening first. They spent hours discussing the connection, trying to understand it. Elena explained that the dreams felt completely real while she was having them, but when she woke up, she could tell they weren't her own experiences. It's like watching a movie, she said, but I'm the main character, and I can feel everything the character feels. David was fascinated, but also concerned. It hurt you? Having these dreams? No, not at all. If anything, I wake up feeling rested and happy. Your thoughts are so peaceful and positive. Even when you're worried about something, there's an underlying kindness to the way you think. But what if I think about something you wouldn't want to experience? David asked. Elena considered this. I don't think that's possible. I can only seem to access thoughts that involve me, and all of those thoughts have been respectful and caring. It's like there's a filter that only lets through the emotions and images that come from a good place. As they talked, David realized how much he had come to care about Elena, not just because of their mysterious connection, but because of who she was, kind, thoughtful, and brave enough to explore something that could have been frightening. Elena, he said, I want you to know that I never intended for this to happen. I would never want to invade your privacy or make you uncomfortable. I know, she replied, reaching over to touch his hand, and I want you to know that I'm not afraid of this connection. If anything, I'm grateful for it. I've never felt so understood by another person. They sat in comfortable silence, both processing what this meant for their relationship. Whatever was happening between them was beyond normal human experience, but it felt natural and right. So what do we do now? David asked. Elena smiled. I think we see where this leads us, but maybe we should start with that dinner at the Italian restaurant. David laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. I'll make a reservation. Their first dinner at the Italian restaurant was perfect. David had worried that meeting in person might feel awkward after sharing such an intimate mental connection. But Elena was even more wonderful in real life than in his thoughts. She laughed at his jokes, shared stories about her patients, and made him feel like the most interesting person in the world. Over the following weeks, David and Elena began spending more time together. They would meet for coffee, take walks in the park, and have long conversations about everything and nothing. Their relationship felt natural and comfortable, enhanced by the unique bond they shared. David discovered that their connection worked both ways now. Sometimes he would wake up with feelings or images that seemed to come from Elena's mind. He would sense her exhaustion after particularly difficult shifts, or feel her contentment when she was reading a good book. It was as if they were slowly becoming connected on a level deeper than normal couples ever experienced. At first, this deeper connection felt like a gift. David would focus his thoughts on Elena throughout the day, imagining pleasant scenarios for them to share. He would picture them cooking together, dancing in her living room, or taking weekend trips to nearby towns. Elena would often mention the next day that she had dreamed about these exact activities. I had the most wonderful dream last night, she told him one morning over coffee. We were at this little bed and breakfast in the mountains, sitting by a fireplace and planning all the places we wanted to visit together. David smiled, remembering how he had spent the previous evening researching mountain retreats and imagining surprising Elena with a romantic getaway. That sounds like a perfect weekend, he said. It felt so real. Elena continued. I could smell the wood smoke and feel the warmth of the fire. I even remember the pattern on the quilt that was draped over the couch. David's excitement grew as he realized how detailed Elena's dreams were becoming. He began spending more time each evening carefully crafting mental scenarios, adding more specificity and complexity to his thoughts. He would imagine elaborate dates, conversations they might have, and experiences they could share. Elena responded to each scenario with increasing precision. When David imagined them visiting a specific art museum, Elena would wake up with detailed knowledge about paintings she had never seen. When he pictured them learning to cook Thai food together, she would suggest they try making pad Thai the next day. It's amazing how connected we've become, Elena said one evening as they sat on David's couch. Sometimes I feel like I know what you're thinking before you even think it. David felt a thrill of power at these words. If he could influence Elena's dreams and thoughts so completely, what else might be possible? He began experimenting with more complex scenarios, testing the limits of their connection. One night, he spent hours imagining Elena rearranging her apartment in a specific way, moving her furniture to create a cozy reading nook by the window. The next morning, he looked across the courtyard and saw that her living room had been completely reorganized, exactly as he had pictured it. I had the strangest urge to redecorate last night, Elena mentioned when they met for lunch. I couldn't sleep until I moved everything around. It's weird, but I feel like the apartment is more comfortable now. David felt both excited and slightly unsettled. Elena had acted on his thoughts without even realizing it. He hadn't just influenced her dreams, he had somehow guided her actual behavior. The incidents became more frequent and more specific. When David imagined Elena trying a new hairstyle, she would show up the next day with her hair styled exactly as he had pictured. When he thought about her wearing a particular dress, she would choose that exact outfit from her closet. "You have such good taste," Elena complimented him one evening, gesturing to her outfit. "I don't know why, but I've been feeling more confident about my style choices lately." David realized that Elena wasn't consciously aware of how her actions were being influenced. She thought she was making her own decisions, but really she was responding to his mental suggestions. The thought both thrilled and worried him. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived in apartment 3B, stopped David in the hallway one morning. "I've been meaning to ask you about your friend Elena," she said, looking concerned. "Is she feeling all right lately?" "She seems fine to me," David replied, though he felt a flutter of worry. "Why do you ask?" "I've been seeing her walking around the building at strange hours," Mrs. Chen explained. "Last night I saw her in the courtyard at 3 in the morning, just standing there looking up at the windows. She seemed to be in some kind of trance." David's heart sank. "Are you sure it was Elena?" "Oh yes, I'm certain. She was wearing those blue pajamas she likes, but she seemed completely unaware of where she was. When I called out to her, she didn't respond at all." That evening, David decided to test something. He focused intensely on an image of Elena walking through the building, checking each floor as if she were looking for something specific. He pictured her moving quietly through the hallways, feeling drawn to explore areas she had never visited before. Around midnight, David heard soft footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. He looked through the peephole and saw Elena walking slowly down the corridor, her eyes unfocused and distant. She was moving exactly as he had imagined, checking each apartment door as if searching for something. David watched in horror as Elena reached the end of the hallway and began walking toward the stairwell. She was clearly not fully awake, moving in response to his mental commands rather than her own conscious will. He quickly opened his door and called out softly, "Elena?" She stopped and turned toward him, her eyes gradually focusing. "David, what am I doing here? I thought I was in my apartment." "You were sleepwalking," David said, his voice tight with guilt. "Let me walk you back to your room." Elena looked confused and disoriented. "I don't understand. I've never sleepwalked before in my life." As David helped Elena back to her apartment, he realized that their connection had become something dangerous. He wasn't just sharing thoughts with her anymore. He was controlling her behavior, even when she was unconscious. "Elena," he said as they reached her door, "have you been feeling tired lately? Or having trouble sleeping?" She nodded slowly. "Actually, yes. I've been waking up exhausted. Like I've been busy all night even though I can't remember doing anything. And sometimes I find myself in different rooms with no memory of going there." David felt sick with guilt. His mental experiments were harming Elena, and she didn't even realize what was happening. He had to find a way to control this connection before it hurt her even more. "Maybe you should see a doctor," he suggested, though he knew no doctor would be able to explain what was really happening. "Maybe," Elena agreed, looking worried. "This has never happened to me before. I hope it's just stress from work." As David watched Elena disappear into her apartment, he realized that their beautiful connection had become a burden. He had the power to influence her thoughts and actions. But using that power was hurting the person he cared about most. Something had to change. But David wasn't sure if he was strong enough to give up the intoxicating feeling of being so completely connected to Elena. The power was becoming addictive, and he was losing control of himself just as Elena was losing control of her own mind. David barely slept that night. The image of Elena walking through the hallway in a trance haunted him. He had caused that. His thoughts, his mental experiments, were controlling her in ways that went far beyond dreams. She was losing pieces of herself, and it was his fault. The next morning, David made a decision. He would stop focusing his thoughts on Elena completely. No more mental scenarios. No more elaborate daydreams. If their connection was hurting her, then he had to cut it off, no matter how much it meant to him, for 3 days. David tried to empty his mind whenever thoughts of Elena appeared. He threw himself into his work, took long walks around the neighborhood, and even tried meditation apps on his phone. But controlling his thoughts proved nearly impossible. Elena was everywhere in his mind, her laugh, her smile, the way she looked when she was concentrating on something important, despite his efforts. David noticed that Elena's condition was getting worse, not better. She looked exhausted every time he saw her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she moved like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. On Thursday evening, Elena knocked on his door. When David opened it, he was shocked by how tired she looked. "David, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice shaky. "Something is really wrong with me." David invited her in and made tea while Elena sat on his couch, wrapping herself in a blanket like she was cold despite the warm weather. "I've been keeping a journal," Elena said, pulling out a small notebook, "writing down everything I can remember about my dreams and the times I wake up in strange places." She opened the journal, and David could see pages filled with her neat handwriting. "Look at this," she said, pointing to an entry. "Last Tuesday, I wrote about a dream where we went to a farmer's market together, but I wrote it at 3 in the morning, and I don't remember writing it at all." David's heart sank as he looked at the page. The entry described in detail a scenario he had imagined the night before, right down to the specific vegetables they had bought and the conversation they had shared. And here, Eleanor continued, flipping pages. "I wrote about visiting a lighthouse by the ocean, again, at 3 in the morning, with no memory of writing it, but the strangest part is that it's written in my handwriting, but the thoughts don't feel like mine." David recognized every single scenario Elena had written about. Each one came from his own imagination, his own late-night thoughts about experiences they could share together. "Elena," David said carefully, "what do you think is happening to you?" "I think I'm losing my mind," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "I'm writing things I don't remember writing, going places I don't remember going, and feeling exhausted all the time. I made an appointment with a doctor, but how do I explain that I'm living someone else's thoughts?" David felt like his heart was breaking. Elena was suffering because of him, and she didn't even understand why. He realized he had to tell her the truth, even if it meant losing her forever. "Elena," he said, sitting down beside her, "I need to tell you something, and you're probably going to hate me for it." She looked at him with confused, tired eyes. "What do you mean?" David took a deep breath. "Those dreams you've been having, the things you've been writing in your journal, they're not coming from your mind. They're coming from mine." "I don't understand," Elena said. "I've been thinking about you every night, imagining scenarios of us together, planning out detailed experiences in my mind. And somehow, you've been receiving those thoughts and acting them out, even when you're asleep." Elena stared at him for a long moment. "Are you saying that you're controlling my dreams?" "Not controlling," David said quickly. "I never meant for this to happen. But yes, I think my thoughts are somehow reaching you and influencing your behavior. The farmer's market, the lighthouse, even the way you've been rearranging your apartment, those all came from my imagination." Elena stood up abruptly, the blanket falling to the floor. "You mean every dream I've been having, every mysterious feeling I've had, has been because of you thinking about me?" "Elena, please understand, I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't even know this was possible until it started happening. But you kept doing it, Elena said, her voice getting stronger. Even after you realized what was happening, you kept putting thoughts in my head. David felt shame wash over him. You're right. I got carried away. The connection felt so special, so unique. I love being able to share my thoughts with you, even if it was one-sided. One-sided? Elena laughed bitterly. David, I haven't had a thought of my own in weeks. I've been living your fantasies instead of my own life. Elena began pacing around the room. No wonder I've been so tired. My brain has been working overtime, processing your thoughts on top of my own experiences. In the sleepwalking, I've been acting out your mental scenarios while unconscious. I'm so sorry, David said, standing up. I know how wrong this is. I've been trying to stop thinking about you for the past few days, but it's harder than I thought. Trying to stop, Elena turned to face him. David, you have to stop completely. This connection is destroying my health and my sense of self. David nodded, feeling tears in his own eyes. I know, you're right, but Elena, I need you to know that everything I imagined for us came from a place of love. I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone. I know you care about me, Elena said, her voice softer now, and I care about you too. But this isn't love, David. Love respects the other person's autonomy. Love doesn't take control of someone else's mind. David realized she was absolutely right. What he had thought was a beautiful connection was actually a form of mental intrusion. He had been so focused on how special their bond felt that he hadn't considered what it was costing Elena. What do we do now? David asked. Elena sat back down, looking drained. I think you need to move away from here. The words hit David like a physical blow. Move away? I don't think I can recover while you're living across the courtyard from me, Elena explained. Even if you try to control your thoughts, the proximity seems to strengthen our connection. I need space to get my own mind back. David understood, but it didn't make the truth any less painful. You're right. I'll start looking for a new place tomorrow. Thank you, Elena said. I think it's the only way. Over the next 2 weeks, David found a new apartment across town and began packing his belongings. Elena helped him sometimes, and they talked about what had happened between them. The conversations were difficult but necessary. I want you to know, Elena said on his last day in the building, that despite everything, I don't regret meeting you. You taught me something important about human connection, even if we took it too far. I learned something too, David replied. I learned that loving someone means wanting what's best for them, even if it means sacrificing what you want for yourself. 3 months later, David received a letter from Elena. She wrote that her sleep had returned to normal, and she was feeling like herself again. She had started dating someone new, a kind doctor from her hospital who respected her independence. I still think about you sometimes, she wrote, but now the thoughts are my own. I hope you're doing well and that you've learned to use your gift more responsibly. David smiled as he read the letter. He had learned to control his thoughts and had started dating someone new as well. His relationship with Lisa was different from what he had shared with Elena, more normal, but also more honest and respectful. He never forgot Elena or the extraordinary connection they had shared, but he also never forgot the lesson she had taught him about the difference between love and possession, between sharing a connection and taking control of another person's mind. Sometimes late at night, David would wonder what might have happened if he had been more careful with their gift from the beginning. But he knew that some questions were better left unanswered. Elena was happy and healthy, and that was what mattered most. David folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer. Then he went to the kitchen to start dinner for Lisa, focusing his thoughts on the present moment and the real person in his life, who chose to be with him freely, without any supernatural influence guiding her decisions.